letting some additional companies. My company has joined a pilot program for defense industrial base, and I think it's if your company's eligible to join it, I think it's a great thing. The Australian Defense Industrial Security Program and the Australian Industry Capability, they were doing some things similar to the defense industrial base. Incidentally, Australia is also considering some things that, if we have time, we'll talk about in the malicious activities work that is necessary in terms of ISP filtering. ISP filtering of malicious activity. There's a wonderful report written by the Australian government about ISPs and filtering. Of course, the U.S. Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, some unclassified aspects of it were recently revealed, and it gives some indication there really are some very good things that are happening in the government, and it is making some progress in helping the government. And I think they're struggling with how they can translate some of that to help some of the private companies more. So the DIB initiative, Defense Industrial Base, trying to make access to the threat and vulnerability information. And they are also working with, there's a pilot program with civilian folks. Department of Homeland Security is creating the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. And, you know, we love acronyms, the NCIRP, of course. And they're doing a pilot through a Presidential Advisory Committee, the National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, the NSTAC, to really try to see about sharing absolutely important information across the private sector and with government. So these are some initiatives that I think are very exciting, and there are some of the leaders of those from the private sector that have been working on this forever, and they're finally getting some traction. Some of you may not have seen it, and we'll make the slides available. Initiative 12 from the CNCI defined the federal role for extending cybersecurity into critical infrastructure domains. I'm sure you've heard about, there's been recent publicity about the Einstein program at DHS. The cyber lead for DHS, Phil Reitinger, testified this week about the funding requirements for Einstein. So those of you who care about it, it's the Block 3 program, probably want to Google Phil Reitinger's testimony, and also the testimony of Keith Alexander, who's up to head the Cyber Command. Some of that issue about the military role, the NSA role versus the civilian role, and how and whether and how they're going to share technologies and information with the private sector so that folks are more capable and more ready to find and stop, or at least minimize the losses from some of the more sophisticated threats. As I suggested, I think we need greater clarity on what we need to worry about, what we need to do about it. So I'm suggesting that we form basically a leadership committee, a steering committee that would be chaired by the White House Cyber Coordinator, made up of senior representatives of the 6 or 7 major departments that have existing authorities, because I do not believe, although you can work in parallel to try to change authorities, I don't believe we're going to change them. And we need representatives of the private sector on that group, and they would serve like a board of directors. No extra power, just folks bringing the power in. You have the private sector representatives that are from the current public-private partnership, and that group would meet, say, 4 times a year. And they would help to shepherd and create the framework for a strategic approach to cyber risk. And I think they need to identify strategic national cyber priorities that can then be, goals can be set from the public-private partnership, milestones can be set, and then we can track progress. And I think, so I believe those are cyber risk, preparedness, malicious activity, and research and development. And the idea of saying, okay, we're going to work these areas, and then the information goes up, and you've got visibility, the Hill, OMB, the White House. This is what we're trying to work on. We need to create a national cyber risk assessment, strengthening the classified one that exists. We need to identify our objectives. Where are we going in terms of common operating picture? Where are we going in terms of the National Cyber Incident Response Plan? The ability to detect, to analyze, to respond, and recover. A meaningful malicious activity and cybercrime initiative that prioritizes who are the most significant bad guys, who's enabling them, and I think that's one of the critical points. And research and development. We've been talking for years. We need more cyber R&D. But we don't have it, and we don't have the visibility that this is what we need to worry about, this is what we need to do about it. At DHS, we created a strategic plan for cyber with the mission, the vision, the goals, and the objectives and the milestones. And when I ran that up through the hierarchy, and of course I had to do it through DHS, so it did not and could not have visibility anywhere else. But nobody was pushing for this kind of thing, and that's essentially what I'm suggesting that we need to do. Not just another high-level strategy, but something that's saying these are the strategic priorities, these are the goals, these are the milestones. And when our strategic cyber plan got to a very high level in DHS, it was rejected. We were not authorized to share it with the public sector. And it was rejected because by specifying goals, objectives, and milestones based on time, it would be easy for people to know if we failed. And that was precisely why we wanted to create such a plan, because we wanted to be able to have, like the after action from Cyberstorm 1, this is what we need to do, and this is how we're doing on it. So if the senior folks come together quarterly on what's the status, where do we stand, they share the responsibility to make it happen, to be accountable. That if something goes wrong, they're going to be blamed. But more importantly, making it easy for folks to say, this is what we need to do, and are we doing it? So we need the critical stakeholders, identifying critical functions, assessing and mitigating risk, plan and building capacity for response and recovery, using standards to drive risk reduction, exercise to identify gaps and improve, and pursue innovation. We need that. Each organization needs that, and our nation needs that. We mentioned something about R&D. We've been talking forever about R&D, and I think R&D is great, but we have exciting new technologies. Perhaps there's some here, perhaps there's some showcasing at some of the tables downstairs. But we are not sharing information about what our security requirements are, what products we've had experience with, what works and what doesn't work. We need somebody in the government to take the lead, working closely with the private sector to say, okay, these are the critical things that we're worried about. And maybe you might say, you know, endpoint security, or the ability of a citizen or a bank customer to deal with a website to do a secure transaction. The ability to have enterprise management, the ability to see every device connected to the network, the security status of every device, to see whether you're in compliance. So basically say, okay, well, let's share information across the agencies of what are they doing for each of these, and you can't do everything, but each of these. What works, what doesn't work, how well does it work, what's the ROI, what are the challenges? And then say to the private sector, for these areas, what can you do? Step up to the plate, not just at a Gartner Magic Quadrant level, but specifically, what can you do? What's your definition of how quick or real time? And then you share that information, and then when the folks in the government are going out to do the contracting efforts, hopefully they have to review and they've got access to it. And the companies that want to compete, they can say, well, this is where it stands. I can do better than that. I can meet requirements you guys haven't even thought of. That's innovation. And although we want R&D, there are great companies out there that can really help provide real value to government and private sector organizations every day, and we are just not systematically encouraging or pursuing that innovation and that information sharing. To me, it's just obvious that we ought to be doing this. And even the cross-agency RFIs, requests for information that go out from agencies now and then, although they're not all stacked, it's not a regularized process of improvement and innovation and encouraging innovation, and even sometimes funding some of these things, going beyond like the InQtel, the narrow funding, to try to encourage some of these technologies. So trying to identify requirements for resource allocation for risk mitigation, response, research, and development. I think one of the largest missing things is a serious effort on malicious activity. We have relegated, and I was a federal prosecutor, I believe the people in law enforcement are doing a tremendous job. They are not even close to thinking about being about solving the problem of cybercrime, the problem of malicious activity. That is not their job. We talk about people, processes, and technology. That's got to be part of malicious activity and cybercrime. We need a strategic approach. We have a largely reactive approach, supplemented by awareness raising, supplemented by some really good things like the European Convention on Cybercrime. But to hear people in 2010 say, oh, we need a big arrest of a bunch of bad people. If you think for 1 second that the bad guys are going to be dissuaded from the biggest publicity you'll ever get about malicious activity, you got another thing coming. Because you know the old story or whatever, that the bad guys don't think they're going to get caught, the good guys think they're going to get caught, and the bad guys are generally right. Particularly in cyberspace. We have the ability to identify who are the most significant malicious actors in cyberspace. And we have the ability to know who's enabling them. Just like in terms of cyber attacks, we may not know who's ultimately behind the bad stuff coming from an IP address. It might be originating there, it might be coming from someplace else. But we know which ISP that IP address is under. We have to go with the information we do have. And I'm not just saying, you know, go blow up the IP address. You know, that's for others, that's for Title 10, Title 50. I'm saying is we've got to basically say, The bad guys have to be able to connect. They have to be able